There's a particular kind of moment that reveals everything about a person. Not the moments they've prepared for, not the speeches, the handshakes, the dinners where they know they're being watched. The moment that tells you the truth is always the quiet one, the accidental one, the one where they believe no one important is listening and they say exactly what they think. I know this because I've spent 64 years collecting those moments, and the most important one happened on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when my son-in-law was standing in the hallway outside his own boardroom, and I was standing 6 feet away, close enough to hear every word he said about me. But I'll get to that. My name is Walter Beaumont. Most people call me Walt. I'm 64 years old, and I live in a red brick house on a quiet street in the Glebe neighborhood of Ottawa. The kind of street where the maples go absolutely ridiculous in October, and the neighbors still wave at each other when they pull out of their driveways in the morning. I've lived in this house for 27 years. I bought it the year my daughter Sienna was born, and I planted a sugar maple in the front yard the same week we brought her home from the Civic Hospital. That tree is taller than the house now. I drive a 2007 Subaru Outback, dark blue, or what used to be dark blue before 11 Ottawa winters took their toll. There's a long scratch along the passenger door from when I misjudged the clearance at a Costco parking garage on Merivale Road about 4 years ago. I keep meaning to get it fixed. I probably won't. My daughter Sienna has been after me to trade it in for something newer, since the odometer rolled past 200,000 kilometers. I tell her the Outback, and I have an understanding. We've been through enough together that neither of us owes the other any explanations. I wear practical clothes, flannels in the fall and winter, canvas work shirts in the summer, a good pair of Blundstone boots that I've resoled twice, and intend to resole at least twice more. I shop at Canadian Tire when I need something for the house and Emique when I need something for outside it. My neighbor Dennis Archambault, a retired professor from Carleton, once leaned over the fence while I was splitting wood in the backyard and said, "Walt, you're either the most contented man in this city, or you're running some kind of very long, very convincing performance." I laughed and told him I didn't have the energy for performance. We talked about the Senators for a while, which in Ottawa is basically its own form of collective suffering, and then I went back inside. Here's what Dennis doesn't know. Here's what the people at my parish don't know, and what the young financial advisor at the RBC branch on Bank Street didn't know last spring when he tried to talk me into upgrading my checking account to something with a monthly fee, and a card that had a little more prestige to it. I own Beaumont Infrastructure Partners, commercial real estate across 7 provinces, a private equity division, and a project management firm that has had its hands in infrastructure contracts from Halifax to Prince George for the better part of 3 decades. Everything is held through a layered structure of numbered companies and family trusts. The kind of structure that a very good Bay Street lawyer helped me build over many years specifically, so that my name would not appear anywhere a curious person could find it with a search engine. No business profiles, no industry magazines, no gala photos with my face on a placard. I built it that way because I learned early that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most dangerous one. Beaumont Infrastructure Partners is worth, as of last fiscal year, just under $2 billion. And I drive a scratched Subaru and I split my own firewood, and I have never once felt the need to apologize for either of those things. I want to pause here and say something, because I think it matters. We live in a country that likes to tell itself a certain story about equality, about how it doesn't matter what you drive, or what you wear, or what postal code you grew up in. And I believe in that story, mostly. But I also know that a lot of people don't actually live it. There is a version of Canada, particularly in certain Toronto dining rooms and certain Calgary boardrooms and certain Vancouver neighborhoods, where a man who pulls up in a 10-year-old Subaru and wears a flannel shirt to a dinner party is quietly evaluated and quietly filed away under a certain category. And the people doing that filing believe they're being subtle. They're not. I've been watching them do it my entire adult life, and I stopped being bothered by it a long time ago, because I realized it was the single most useful information they could give me. Now let me tell you about my daughter. Sienna Beaumont is 34 years old, and she is, without any question or qualification, the best thing I have ever done. She has her mother's laugh, the kind that takes over a whole room before it's finished starting. Her mother Pauline passed 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer caught late. Sienna sat with her every single day in that hospital, and when it was over she came home and she planted a garden in the backyard, because she said she needed something alive to take care of. I understood completely. Sienna is a landscape architect. She has designed green spaces for 3 separate city projects in Ottawa, a community garden in Vanier that won a national award, and a rooftop park for a mixed-use building in Gatineau that she is still quietly proud of in the way she's always been quietly proud of things. without ever needing anyone else to notice. When she was 8 years old, she drew a detailed plan for reorganizing my entire garage, complete with labeled zones and a color-coded legend, and presented it to me on a Saturday morning with the calm authority of someone who had already decided the conversation was happening whether I agreed or not. I stood there looking at this 8-year-old with her ruler and her felt markers, and I thought, this child is going to be absolutely unstoppable. I was right about that. What I was not prepared for was her husband. 2.5 years ago, Sienna brought home a man named Fletcher Crane, and I want to be fair about this. I genuinely do. I've lived long enough to understand that a father's first reaction to the man his daughter loves says at least as much about the father as it does about the man. So let me describe Fletcher as honestly as I can manage. Fletcher Crane is 38 years old, good-looking in the particular way of men who have spent a great deal of time and money making sure of it. He went to the Ivy Business School at Western and will find a way to mention this within the first 15 minutes of meeting you, regardless of what the conversation is actually about. He wear the muscles and she is like Sienna once and told me in passing, and I have not been able to forget it since. He has a specific manner of speaking about himself, an easy, confident rhythm, where every story somehow circles back to a decision he made, a deal he closed, an opportunity he recognized when others didn't. Within 20 minutes of our first meeting at a restaurant on Elgin Street, Fletcher had covered his MBA, a recent trip to Copenhagen, a ski chalet he and his friends were looking at purchasing in Tremblant, and his opinion on the current state of the Toronto condo market. He said all of this while barely pausing for breath, and he looked at me across the table with the specific warmth of a man who has already decided what category you belong in and is now just being polite about it. I smiled. I ordered the soup. I filed it away. I think most of us have encountered a Fletcher Crane somewhere in our lives. At a colleague's dinner party. At a family gathering where someone brought a boyfriend who needed everyone in the room to know exactly who he was. And I think we often make the mistake of assuming those men are simply annoying. They're not just annoying. They're telling you something very specific about themselves. They're telling you what keeps them up at night. Fletcher was afraid of being ordinary, so he made absolutely sure that no one around him ever forgot that he wasn't. 8 months after meeting Sienna, Fletcher Crane was appointed President and Chief Executive Officer of Northgate Logistics Group, a freight and supply chain company based in Mississauga, with operations across Ontario, Quebec, and the Western provinces. 412 employees. Significant contracts with several major retailers and 2 provincial health authorities. Here is where this story becomes something other than what it appears to be. Northgate Logistics Group is a subsidiary of Beaumont Infrastructure Partners. It was acquired 12 years ago. I have sat at the head of that board table since before Fletcher Crane finished his undergraduate degree. Fletcher got the CEO position through what appeared, from every angle anyone looked at, to be a completely standard executive search. A reputable firm out of Toronto, multiple rounds of interviews, reference checks, board evaluation, compensation negotiations, all of it clean, all of it proper. What Fletcher did not know and does not know to this day is that I reviewed every stage of that process. I read his interview transcripts through a private arrangement with the search firm. I spoke with 2 of his former colleagues under a different name and a different pretense. I reviewed every evaluation the board submitted. I approved his salary, his performance targets, and his signing package. Then I drove my Subaru home to Ottawa, made a pot of tea, and watched the news. Fletcher sent Sienna a bottle of champagne that evening. She texted me a photo of it with a single emoji. I texted back congratulations and told her she deserved every good thing. I put my phone down and went to bed. I want to be honest with you. In the beginning I wanted Fletcher to succeed, not for his sake, for Sienna's. Because a father who loves his daughter doesn't root against the man she has chosen. He roots for the choice to be right. So I gave Fletcher every resource, every advantage. I watched carefully, I waited, and I hoped. Fletcher didn't disappoint me by failing at the job. Fletcher disappointed me by showing me slowly and unmistakably who he actually was. It started in a way it almost always starts. Small, almost easy to dismiss. Sienna hosted a summer dinner at their place in Roncesvalles last July Canada Day weekend. A few of Fletcher's colleagues from Northgate, a couple of Sienna's friends from her landscape firm, and me. One of Fletcher's vice presidents, a man named Marcus who laughed too loudly at everything Fletcher said, asked me what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Fletcher put a hand briefly on my shoulder and said, "Walt's retired. Sienna's dad, he had a good run back in the day. Construction or something, right, Walt? More wine, Marcus?" Just like that. Smoothed over, redirected, catalogued and shelved in the span of 4 seconds. I said, "Yes, sure, I think there's a Pinot Grigio open on the counter." And I went and talked to Sienna's friend from work about her urban garden project in the Junction. I filed it away. If you've ever had that experience of someone speaking for you in a room full of strangers and compressing your entire life into a polite, dismissible sentence, you know that what you feel isn't quite anger. It's something slower than anger. It's the feeling of watching someone confidently draw a map of a place they've never actually been, and deciding whether or not it's worth the effort of showing them how wrong they are. Most of the time, it isn't. The time will come on its own. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in October. I had been in Mississauga for a routine visit to the Northgate offices, arranged quietly through one of my holding companies. Nothing unusual about the visit from anyone's perspective who didn't know what they were looking at. Which was everyone there. I am good at being unremarkable. A man in a fleece jacket and dark trousers walking the hallways of a logistics company looks like exactly what people assume he is. Someone's visiting uncle, a facilities contractor, a person of no particular consequence. I was walking past a glassed-in meeting room near the executive floor when I heard Fletcher's voice. The door was open maybe 4 inches. He was talking to someone. From the voice I recognized the CFO, a woman named Patricia, who I knew to be competent and who I suspected had more questions about the company's actual ownership structure than she'd ever asked out loud. Fletcher was saying, "Sienna's dad? Walt? Oh, he's completely harmless, salt of the earth type. I think he did okay for himself in contracting years ago, probably government work, you know how that goes. But Sienna feels this sort of duty to include him in things because of her mum. She calls him every Sunday, bless her. He mostly putters and is around his yard and drives that ancient Subaru of his. Honestly, Patricia, the man showed up to our place on Canada Day wearing a shirt from XC that I'm pretty sure I've seen him in since 2018. Patricia said something I didn't catch. Fletcher said, quieter but not quiet enough. Between you and me, he asked me once if I had a good mechanic because his back brakes were squealing. I gave him the number of my guy in Etobicoke. A pause. He texted me the next week to say the mechanic was very reasonable. Very reasonable. That's Walt. They both laughed. I stood in that hallway. I breathed slowly the way I have taught myself to breathe when something sharp is happening. I straightened my fleece jacket. I walked back the way I had come. I said nothing. Not to Fletcher, not to Sienna, not to anyone. I drove back to Ottawa that evening. I stopped for gas outside Kingston and ate a sandwich I'd packed at a rest stop on the 401, while a transport truck idled beside me and the October dark came down fast over the highway. And I thought about my father, who built houses for 40 years in Sudbury without ever once describing himself as a builder. He always just said he worked in construction. My father was a man who believed that the work was the statement, and that any man who needed to explain the work probably hadn't done enough of it. I let Fletcher's words sit with me. I am a patient man. I come from patient men. I knew what was coming, and I knew it would come in its own time. And I knew that what I needed to do until then was absolutely nothing. Patience is not weakness. Patience is accuracy. It means you wait until you can see the whole board before you move. If you've been listening this far and you're finding yourself in this story somehow, would you do me a quick favor and hit the subscribe button? It genuinely helps this channel, and it costs you nothing at all. Thank you. Let's keep going. The dinner invitation came through Sienna 6 weeks later, a Thursday evening call, her voice warm and a little eager in that way she gets when she's hoping everyone she loves is going to get along. Fletcher's parents, Roland and Constance Crane, were hosting a dinner at their home in Forest Hill. Roland was a retired partner at a Bay Street law firm. Constance sat on the boards of 2 arts organizations, and had, according to Sienna, recently had the house redecorated by a designer whose name she said with a specific reverence that told me everything I needed to know about the household. Sienna said, "Dad, they've been asking to meet you properly. A real dinner, just family. You'll like them." Roland tells these incredible stories. I said, "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to." And I smiled into the phone, because I already knew several things about Roland and Constance Crane that would have made that sentence very difficult for Sienna to complete if she'd known them too. 2 days before the dinner, Fletcher called me directly, which was unusual. We texted occasionally. We didn't call each other. He was breezy, easy, the particular kind of easy that a certain kind of man deploys when he's decided to say something mildly uncomfortable, and has already committed to saying it. He said, "Hey Walt, just wanted to touch base before Saturday. My folks, they're pretty traditional, old Toronto. Mother especially. It's their anniversary dinner, so the dress is a bit more formal. I just thought, might be nice to, make a bit of an effort. Sport coat, that kind of thing, nothing crazy." There was a pause. I said pleasantly, "I appreciate you thinking of me, Fletcher." He said, of course, just want everyone to be comfortable." I said, "I'll see you Saturday." I hung up. I stood in my front hallway for a long moment looking at the coat rack where my flannels hang. And I thought about my father. I thought about the Sunday suit he wore 3 times a year, Easter, Christmas, and funerals. The rest of the time he wore his work clothes, and he never once seemed to think this was something that required an apology or an explanation. I walked to my bedroom. I opened the closet. I walked past the charcoal wool suit from a Toronto tailor I've worn maybe 6 times since 2011. I walked past the navy blazer, past the gray herringbone I wore to receive an industry award in 2019 that I did not attend under my own name. I walked past all of it, and I took out what I had already decided I was taking out. A clean pair of dark chinos, a pressed blue chambray shirt, my Blundstone boots, and my fleece vest. The same fleece vest Fletcher had mentioned to Patricia in the October hallway. I laid it out on the bed. Then I went outside and sat on the back porch in the November cold for a few minutes, looking at Pauline's garden, gone to sleep for the winter, and I thought, I am not dressing like this because I have nothing better. I am dressing like this because I want to see exactly what these people are made of when they believe nothing is at stake. 40 years in business has taught me that the most honest information you will ever receive about a person comes in the moments they don't think they're being evaluated. Saturday arrived without ceremony. I woke at 5:30, made coffee in the old mocha pot that belonged to Pauline's mother, sat at the kitchen table looking out at the backyard, and felt very calm. I have spent a long time making peace with calmness. There are men who mistake calm for passivity. Those men have usually spent a great deal of their lives being wrong about things. I drove the Outback to Toronto. 5 hours on the 417 and the 401. Coffee from a Tim Hortons outside Brockville, CBC Radio 1 most of the way. The November sky was low and white, the kind of sky that can't quite decide whether to snow. I pulled into Forest Hill just before 6 in the evening, into a neighborhood of homes that have been expensive for so long that the expense has stopped feeling like something to notice. The Crane House was a 3-story Victorian on a street lined with mature oaks, lights warm in every window, a black iron gate, a flagstone path. I parked the Outback at the curb. I watched a man 2 houses down get out of a Tesla and glance at my car the way certain people in certain neighborhoods glance at things that don't quite fit the visual grammar of the street. I got out. I walked up the path. Roland Crane opened the door himself. He was a tall man, well into his 70s, silver-haired, with the particular ease of someone who has spent 5 decades walking into rooms and never once doubted whether he belonged. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and gray trousers and the specific kind of relaxed confidence that a certain class of Toronto man wears as a second skin. He said, "Walt, come in, so glad you made it." His handshake was firm and calibrated. The handshake of a lawyer who has spent 50 years using handshakes to communicate things that aren't in the contract. I stepped inside. The house was exactly what the exterior promised. High ceilings, original millwork, paintings chosen to be noticed. The kind of home that says we have been here for a long time and we intend to stay. Constance Crane came from the sitting room on my right. She was elegant in the way that women who have been wealthy for their entire adult lives are elegant. Assembled, precise, composed. Her earrings were the kind of understated that is only available at a certain price point. She took my hands in both of hers and said, "Walt, we have heard so much about you. Sienna absolutely adores you. You are just as sweet as she described." Sweet, there it was. The first word out of her mouth. Not accomplished, not interesting, not distinguished. Sweet. The word people use for children, for chocolate, for elderly relatives who still send birthday cards by mail. I said, "Thank you, Constance. You have a beautiful home." She glowed. People who have organized their entire identity around their possessions never tire of hearing those possessions admired. Sienna came down the hallway and went straight into my arms. She has been doing this since she was 3 years old, and I hope she never stops. She whispered, "You look good, Dad." I whispered back, "So do you, sweetheart." Fletcher appeared behind her. He looked at my fleece vest, and for one second I saw it. The smallest possible tightening at the corner of his mouth. The professional smile following immediately after. He clapped me on the shoulder and said something about Roland opening a 20-year-old Burgundy. We moved into the dining room. The table had been set with the kind of formality that is designed not to welcome people, but to remind them of the distance between themselves and their hosts. Crystal, heavy silver, linen that had never seen a Tuesday. I sat down, I unfolded my napkin, and I chose to become invisible. Not because anyone made me invisible, because I decided to be. The most dangerous thing any person can do in a room full of people who have underestimated them is to correct that underestimation too soon. So I sat, I listened, I asked soft questions I already knew the answers to. I complimented the wine before I tasted it, and I watched. Roland ran the conversation the way he had probably run every room in his professional life. From the front with absolute assurance. He talked about his winters in Palm Beach, about a golf trip to Scotland, about what he called Fletcher's remarkable instincts at Northgate, about how the board was apparently very impressed, about how leadership, in his considered opinion, was fundamentally heritable. He looked at me once while saying this. A long, even look. The look of a man doing a very specific kind of comparison. I nodded appreciatively and said, "You must be very proud." Constance turned to Sienna and said, with a smile that had been measured very precisely, "Sienna, you must feel so lucky having someone who provides so well. It's not something every young woman has the opportunity to experience, especially in the current market." The table went quiet for a half-second, just long enough. I watched Sienna's jaw tighten, just slightly, just enough for a father to see. I picked up my water glass. I took a slow, unhurried sip. I said nothing, because the envelope had not yet arrived. And I knew, with the particular certainty of a man who has been paying close attention for 4 decades, that when it did, everything at this table was going to look completely different. There is a moment in any long patience when waiting stops being a strategy and becomes a verdict. That moment came after dessert. I had been at that table for 2 hours and 20 minutes. 2 hours of nodding. 2 hours of listening to Roland's very good stories. 2 hours of eating excellent food and drinking excellent wine and being categorized as sweetly, harmlessly, irrelevantly, as it is possible to be categorized by people who believe they have already understood you. Then Roland reached below his chair, and I felt the shift. The internal one. The shift I have learned to recognize in rooms where something important is about to happen. Where the air changes slightly, and the people who are about to act lean very slightly forward. He placed a dark leather folder on the table and slid it across to me. He said, "Walt, we'd like to have a family conversation." Sienna's hands were not still in her lap. Her thumb was pressing the inside of her index finger, something she has done since she was 9 years old whenever she is nervous and trying not to show it. I did not reach for the folder. Roland said, "Fletcher has been developing a vision. A new venture, his own company built from the ground up. The kind of opportunity that defines a career." He paused. "What we're proposing, and it's all drawn up properly, proper Canadian law, family lawyers have reviewed it, is a bridging arrangement. Sienna's future inheritance, the estate you'll be leaving her, would serve as the foundation for an initial private round of financing. It's clean, it's legal, it's standard family wealth planning." Constance folded her hands on the tablecloth. Fletcher sat with the posture of a man trying very hard to appear relaxed. Roland leaned forward slightly and said, "We just need your blessing, Walt." As her father, I sat with this for a moment. I looked at Roland Crane, at Constance, at Fletcher, at the folder on the table between us. I thought about the highway outside Kingston and the October dark and the cold at the rest stop on the 401. I thought about Pauline's garden and Sienna's hands in her lap and the maple tree in my front yard that was shorter than she was when we planted it. I picked up the folder. I opened it. I read every page. Slowly, completely, every number and every clause and every signature line. The candles burned. A clock somewhere in the house ticked. No one said anything. I closed the folder. I set it back on the table gently. I picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and looked at Roland Crane with the warmest smile I had available. I said, "I appreciate the care that went into this. I'll give it a thorough review." Roland exhaled. Fletcher's shoulders dropped 1 full inch. Constance reached for her wine with the relief of a woman who believed the difficult part was over. They thought they had won. I knew exactly what had just been decided. I finished my water. I made pleasant conversation for another 20 minutes. I thanked Constance for an exceptional dinner. I complimented the tenderloin. I shook Roland's hand a full grip, my eyes holding his for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. He didn't know what that second meant. He would. I walked out to the outback, got in, and sat for a moment in the quiet dark of the Forest Hill Street. Then I pulled out and drove north and east and eventually onto the 401 back toward Ottawa. The outback's heater took about 40 minutes to make up its mind, which is exactly how long it always takes. The November highway was dark and mostly empty. I drove the whole way home in a calm so complete it would probably have frightened anyone who knew what I was carrying. I said nothing for 12 days, not to Fletcher, not to Roland, not to anyone. I went to 10 o'clock mass at my parish. I had coffee with Denny Archambault. I split the last of the winter woodpile. On day 5, Fletcher texted me, "Hey Walt, just checking whether you've had a chance to look at the proposal. Exciting stuff, big opportunity." I waited 3 hours. I typed back, "Still reviewing, these things take time." He sent back a thumbs up. I put my phone down and made a phone call. Not to Fletcher, not to Roland Crane, to 3 specific members of the Northgate Logistics Group Board of Directors. Men who had known me for over a decade. Men who understood with complete clarity that a direct call from my personal line was not a social call. I said full operational audit, standard scope. I want it complete. I said thank you and hung up. Then I went and checked on Pauline's garden. Here's what I knew that Fletcher Crane did not know. Here's what Roland and Constance Crane, sitting in their Forest Hill house, did not know. When I personally drafted Fletcher's employment agreement 3 years ago, I included a clause. Section 12, subsection 4. A fiduciary duty and non-solicitation provision of the specific kind that I have been building into executive contracts since 1997. A clause I designed originally for a different situation in a different decade. For the kind of ambitious executive who might someday convince himself that his position was his own invention rather than someone else's deliberate decision. I had been carrying that clause for a long time. I could wait 12 more days. The audit took 9 days to complete. When the final report arrived on my desk on a Thursday morning, I sat with it for a long time before I did anything else. Not from surprise. Not one sentence of that report surprised me. I sat with it because I needed the absolute certainty that comes from reading every word carefully before you act on any of them. Fletcher Crane had been constructing his independent venture for 7 months, on company time, using company systems. He had used Northgate's internal client databases to identify prospective customers for the new company. He had held meetings with potential investors at restaurants he had expensed to Northgate's corporate account. He had used company devices to communicate with a corporate lawyer in Ontario to incorporate a numbered company that, once operational, would have competed directly with Northgate in the Ontario and Quebec freight corridors. He had begun quietly approaching 2 of Northgate's senior dispatch managers about joining the new venture. Every meeting, every email, every expense submission, every internal communication, all of it documented in the audit report sitting on my desk. I went to my closet. I took out the charcoal wool suit I had not worn since 2019. I had it pressed the evening before. I drove to Toronto the next morning, stopping for coffee at the same Tim Hortons outside Brockville, where I had stopped on the way to Forest Hill. I arrived at Northgate's Mississauga offices at 9:45 in the morning. I parked in the reserved space in front of the building, the one with the small brass sign that reads Beaumont Infrastructure Partners, reserved. The space that Fletcher Crane had walked past 5 days a week for 2.5 years without ever apparently wondering whose name was on it. I took the elevator to the 7th floor. I walked into the boardroom, board members to my left, my outside counsel and 2 of my senior people to my right. The audit report was closed on the table in front of me. Fletcher was scheduled for what he believed was a quarterly operations review in 8 minutes. I straightened my tie. I waited. The door opened. Fletcher Crane walked in with the easy practice confidence of a man completely at home in the room he has been running for 2.5 years. He took in the board members, the lawyers, the documents, the faces, and then he saw me sitting at the head of the conference table in a suit he had never seen, in a chair he believed was his. I watched him understand. It moved across his face the way light moves across a room when someone slowly draws the blinds. The executive search, the contract, the reserved parking space he had never questioned, the folder at the Forest Hill dinner table, his father's careful speech about inherited leadership, all of it arriving at once in that boardroom on that Thursday morning. The silence lasted 8 full seconds. I let every one of them settle. Then I said, very quietly, "Sit down, Fletcher." He sat. I said, "I'm going to say this once. I am not angry. I want you to understand that. Anger belongs to men who didn't see something coming. I saw this coming a long time before you started building it." I opened the folder. I said, "Northgate Logistics Group is owned by Beaumont Infrastructure Partners. Beaumont Infrastructure Partners is privately and completely owned by me, has been for 12 years. The position you have held, the salary you have received, the team you have built, the professional reputation you have constructed over the last 2.5 years exists because I built the company that made all of it possible. I hired you because Sienna loved you. I gave you every resource, every advantage, every opportunity to become something real. And over the last 7 months, you used those resources to build a company designed to compete directly against the one that gave you your career." I closed the folder. I said, "The clause in Section 12 of your employment agreement covers every single finding in this report. My legal team is prepared to pursue this to the full extent available under Ontario law if that becomes necessary." Fletcher had gone very still. The particular stillness of someone who has just realized that the room they walked into is an entirely different room than the one they believed they were walking into. I said, "I am not interested in destroying you. I am interested in clarity. So here is what happens. You resign today, effective immediately, professionally without incident. Your reputation remains intact and this remains between these walls. Or we proceed, and every page in this folder becomes part of a very public record." He looked at the board, neutral. He looked at my lawyers, neutral. He looked back at me. And then something happened that I had not expected. Not defiance, not excuses, not the negotiation I had prepared for. What moved across Fletcher Crane's face was something quieter and more genuine than any of that. It was shame, the deep kind. The kind that only comes when a man sees himself, clearly and completely, in a light he has been avoiding for a long time. He said quietly, "I'll resign." I said, "Good." I stood. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up the folder. At the door I stopped. I turned around. I said, "One more thing. The proposal your father presented at dinner, the one intended to use Sienna's future inheritance as collateral. I'd like you to know that my solicitors transferred Sienna's inheritance last week into a personal irrevocable trust in her name alone. Her signature and hers only for any purpose, any modification, any access. Your father's proposal is now a document about assets that no longer exist where he believed they existed. Please give Roland and Constance my regards. The tenderloin really was exceptional. I drove the Outback home to Ottawa. The 401, the 417, the November sky turning pink over Kingston around 4 in the afternoon. The heater did its usual thing. The scratch on the passenger door caught the last of the daylight somewhere east of Brockville. I pulled into my driveway on my street in the glebe just as the streetlights came on. I sat in the car for a moment. The maple in the front yard, bare now, all its October color long gone, stood very still in the November air. I patted the dashboard once. I went inside. I called Sienna. She arrived 40 minutes later, let herself in through the side door the way she has since she was 16. And found me at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of Earl Grey already poured and waiting. She sat down across from me. She looked at my face the way she has looked at my face since she was very small. Like a map she could read better than anyone else in the world. I told her everything. From the very beginning. The company, the structure, the Northgate appointment and how it had actually happened. The contract clause I had drafted years before she met Fletcher. The boardroom, the audit, the trust I had established for her. Every piece of it laid out quietly on the kitchen table between 2 cups of tea going slowly cold. When I finished, Sienna sat without speaking for a long time. Long enough that I could hear the November wind outside and the furnace clicking in the basement. Then she looked at me and she asked the question I had been carrying the answer to for a very long time. "Dad, why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked down at my mug. I looked out at the window at Pauline's garden, asleep under the first thin frost of winter. I looked back at my daughter, at her mother's laugh, at the 8-year-old with the felt markers and the color-coded legend and the absolute calm certainty that the garage reorganization was going to happen. I said, "Because I wanted your life to be yours. I didn't want you making choices based on what I owned or what I'd built. I wanted you to look at me and see your father, not a company. Not a balance sheet, your father." She reached across the table and took my hand, and I let the rest of it go. Roland Crane sitting in Forest Hill understanding slowly what the quiet man in the fleece vest had actually been. Constance setting down her wine. Fletcher somewhere trying to find language for something that doesn't have good language. I let all of it go, because none of it was what mattered. What mattered was sitting across from me with both hands around a mug of cold tea, not saying anything. Just holding on. I want to leave you with this before I go. We are living in a time that rewards noise, that treats visibility as value, volume as substance, the size of what you show as evidence of the size of what you are. And in that environment it is very easy to underestimate the quiet ones, the ones who build without announcing it, the ones who have been paying attention the entire time while everyone around them assumed they weren't. Those people are everywhere. In every town, every neighborhood, every family. And the thing about them is that they are very patient. And patience, real patience, is not the absence of power. It is power in its most precise form. If you have someone like that in your life, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor, a mentor, someone who has always just been quietly, steadily there, please tell them you see them. Because those people almost never tell you what they've built or what they've carried. And someday they won't be there to tell. If you're watching tonight and you're worried about a situation like this one, please know that in Canada there are real protections in place. The Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario Network, your provincial public guardian and trustee office, and your local legal aid clinic can all provide guidance if someone in your family is facing financial exploitation or pressure from family members to sign documents. And if you are a parent thinking about your children's futures, please talk to an estate planning lawyer about an irrevocable trust. It is not about distrust, it is about love made durable. Legal structure and love are not opposites. Legal structure is love with a plan behind it. One concrete thing you can do this week: write down the names of 3 people you would trust completely with your most important decisions. Just 3 names. That list is the beginning of something real. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Comment number 1 if you believe I was right to wait and let the evidence build before acting. Comment number 2 if you think Roland and Constance deserved to be confronted directly at the dinner table. Comment number 3 if you've ever been in a situation where someone in your family or your life underestimated you because of how you looked or what you drove or where you lived. And wherever you are right now, whether that's Toronto or Vancouver or Halifax or Thunder Bay or somewhere much farther away, I'd love to know. Leave your city and what time it is there. There is something I find genuinely moving about knowing that people all over the country, all over the world, are sitting somewhere listening to the same story at the same moment. Some people don't need the room to know who they are. They already know. And the ones who underestimate them always, without exception, find out. Thank you for being here. I'll see you next time.